All right, I think this is a good time to go ahead and kind of get us started. My name is Sandra Bishnoi. I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in January of 2011. At the time, I was at de novo diagnosis was stage 4. I didn't know I had breast cancer. I was a young mother living in Chicago as an assistant professor of chemistry, raising my 2 small children. At the time, I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I had just finished breastfeeding, and there was a lump that my one breast just never quite went back to normal. And after 4 months of dealing with this, I really decided, well, maybe I should go see go see my OBGYN. And he said, I think that we should maybe send you across the street and get some imaging done. And, I was so clueless. I didn't think young women could get breast cancer. I had no family history of breast cancer. And so I thought, okay, we'll go get some imaging. And, I went immediately from one type of imaging to another. I had a mammogram and an ultrasound. And it wasn't until I got the biopsy and the doctor looked at me and said, Dr. Bishnoi, I have to let you know, before you leave this place, you have breast cancer. It was the first time I thought it was even possible. I don't know, call me clueless, but I just didn't think young women without family histories, could get breast cancer. So I really have to say this organization's been a great lifeline to me to get to know other young women who are going through similar situations. I was lucky enough for a couple of years to be no evidence of disease. My disease came back in January, but I just keep going and keep hoping for those next generation drugs, and I've been very happy to get to know other young women who are young moms and young professionals who are going through the same thing. And so I really look forward to hearing what Dr. Meyer has to say today about young women dealing with cancer. Deborah Meyer is here today to speak to us. She is the UNC Lineberger Director of Cancer Survivorship, Professor at the UNC School of Nursing, and an adult nurse practitioner. Dr. Meyer is currently serving as the editor of the Clinical Journal of Oncology Nursing. She's a member of the ASCO Survivorship Committee and chair of the ASCO Survivorship Care Plan Work Group. She's a former president of the Oncology Nursing Society and has held appointments of the National Cancer Institute's National Cancer Advisory Board and their board of scientific directors. She provides survivorship care to women with breast cancer and is a survivor herself. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Meyer, and if you have questions, please put them on your card and we'll take those cards up at the end. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, and I'd like to keep this very informal, and I'm not supposed to walk around a lot, which is maybe will cause me to stutter or something, because I need to walk and use my hands when I usually do this, so forgive me if I lose my place. I want to introduce this picture first. If any of you are familiar with Lilly Oncology on Canvas, it's a wonderful thing. You can go online and see it, and if you feel artistic, you can actually make a submission. They have sponsored a competition every 2 years for survivors, caregivers, and providers or healthcare professionals in any way. And I'm going to be using artwork throughout from survivors because I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think that this is what happens when you're diagnosed. It's like you're going along, and then all of a sudden things stop. And everybody else keeps going along, and you're side railed by this news, and it changes your life forever. And I do not have metastatic disease, and I wouldn't have been defined as a younger woman with breast cancer, although I'd like to think I was, because I define being younger is, middle age is 15 years beyond whatever you are at the time. So I was like 55, I think, but it's been 7 years. But I was a single mom with a 15-year-old daughter. So some of the issues I'm going to be talking about were relevant despite my age, and we're going to be talking about what are the unique things that you face when you're younger, although they'll reverberate with a lot of the things you've heard all day long. And so you'll be hearing the same things that we're aware of and that are issues that you're facing, and you're the experts that will be telling me more about how things are going or how you've figured out how to handle this, because there's no magic answer. The other thing I would recommend as a read, if you've never read it, have you ever read the essay called The Median is Not the Message? Okay, you can Google it. It was by Stephen Jay Gould, who had a cancer that he was told he was going to have 6 months to live, and he died 20 years later from a different cancer. And he explains statistics in a way that I think is very, very understandable and meaningful, which is a median means half the people didn't get there, but the other half go beyond. And even in something as tough as pancreatic cancer, where the mortality rate at 2 years is very high, there's still a 2% tail of people going off, way off into the distance. And nobody can tell who's in what side of the median or where you are on the tail. And so he really explains that in a way so that you can read all the statistics that you want, you can look at all the numbers and what have you, but you don't know how you're going to do till you're doing it. And that makes it very hard because that creates a lot of uncertainty for what's going to happen to you and how you plan for things or think about things, because nobody's going to be able to tell how you exactly are going to do. We can tell you how a group of people do, but we don't know where you are in all that. But I thought that this picture was very powerful because here's a woman who looks fine, and then the background, as opposed to the foreground, is somebody who now is clearly on some kind of treatment. And then this chart I really like because this is not a linear process. And it's not like you were diagnosed with cancer, you developed metastatic cancer, and then like what Dom was talking about at lunchtime where you're born and then you die. There's so much stuff that happens in between. And most of it's not linear. And the reason I like this, you may not be able to read this is life before cancer, this is life after cancer. And if you saw the original artwork, all of these are words. This is fear, radiation, courage, chemotherapy, hope, friendships, family, perseverance, all the kinds of words that you've heard before and have talked to, but when you see the real work, all those little words on the side are also words that people have attributed to this journey. But as you can also see, it's not linear. None of this is linear. And so it's very difficult if you're a logical person and you like to plan. This isn't the thing to have to do that, because that's not how life goes on. Just in case you want to change your mind about the whole thing. So we use this quality of life framework. Most of us use this quality of life framework, which has 4 domains in it. And one is the physical well-being and symptoms, psychological well-being, social well-being, spiritual well-being, and I'll go through each of those. But the reason we talk about this is you could have poor physical functioning and still have good quality of life, because the other 3 buckets pick it up. Or you can have good physical functioning, but if your relationships or you're having a lot of distress about this, you could have a poor quality of life. And actually, I do my practices with women with breast cancer, but I've been in oncology for 40 years, believe it or not, because I started at 12. But in patients with bone marrow transplants who have a lot of side effects and toxicity from their treatment, cataracts, skin problems, all kinds of issues, they actually measure quite high on quality of life. And that's because even though they're low in physical functioning on some of the side effects that they have, they've made up for it by actually increasing in some of the other areas. So we're going to talk about each of those areas individually. But as you know, better than I know, that in addition to the usual issues facing women with breast cancer, you have the additional issues from being younger. And those might be precipitating menopause. And we do know that menopause that's induced abruptly is more severe and more symptomatic than women who have a year or more to sort of ease into menopause. We know that women get diagnosed at different phases, and fertility may or may not be an issue. You may have your children, you may not have your children. You may choose not to ever have children. But fertility, when you're being faced with this, and we talk about younger cancers as being under 40 because there are certainly some biological differences in that type of cancer as well. The effects on sexuality are profound because one is we give you treatments that age you. We give you hot flashes, we cause vaginal dryness, we take out your libido. I mean, we do everything possible, not intentionally, but I mean, and then we scar you from surgeries, and then we make you lose your hair, and we do all these other kinds of things. How can it not affect who you think of yourself as and of your physical intimacy and relationships? And if you're younger, well, even if you're older, because I've had to deal with that, if you're not in a permanent relationship, Then it gets into issues of telling and showing and doing all the other kinds of issues that are wrapped up in maybe meeting somebody after, while you're dealing with all this. So that's not that's unique to being younger with breast cancer, because as I can attest, when you're older, you can still go through all those kind of issues. But that can have a little bit more of a profound impact. The other issue is many studies have shown that when people are older with cancer, tend to do better coping-wise because they've already lived through a whole bunch of crap. And so, and I'd say something else, but we're being taped, so. But what happens is you've already had multiple traumas, unless you've lived in a bubble throughout your life, to know what you're made of, right? And so you know what you're made of. When you're younger with breast cancer, this may be the first big thing that happens to you. And so your coping skills or your self-awareness of who you are and what you can handle and all that may not be as solid as if you're now 80 and you've gone through multiple events like that. And so when you're younger, it can be more difficult to be managing with that. And then the other issue is you're more likely to have younger children at home. And I work with Lisa on the study she was referring to about parents with metastatic cancer. So we can comment about that as well. But, worrying about little kids is very different. My daughter was 15, and I went and I had to redo all my surgery when she was 20. Wishful thinking, I guess. When she was 20, and I didn't realize how hard that was on her, because she didn't want me to have the surgery, because I had lymphedema and I had, neuropathic pain and other things. And it brought up all this stuff from when she was 15. And I wasn't that aware of that for her, because I was trying to have people keep her life normal and, do all these other things. But it brought it all back up when I was talking about having more surgery. And I was really quite surprised by that. But so, you're in a different developmental stage of your life, and what that means for children, partners, whoever, and the work that you're doing. It also has to do with your work life. Being diagnosed at a time where you may not have a lot of accrued sick leave, or you might not have great benefits, or you may be staying at home right now, raising children or what have you, but try showing up for a job and saying, oh, by the way, not only do I have breast cancer, but I have metastatic breast cancer, which you can disclose or not, but it eventually comes up in some ways. It does affect work, and I've worked with a lot of women who got a lot of support while they were initially diagnosed. Everybody stepped up to the plate because our society has learned you can talk about that, and they help you do all that. And then when you show back up for work, it's all over. They've all gone away, or they think, okay, you're back to work now. I've covered for you all this time. You can do your job again, even though you may have persistent fatigue as an issue, or cognitive fuzziness from all the treatments that you've had. So there's a lot of changes that go on. And I don't know if Anna Kate talked about it before when she was giving her talk, but we talk about BC and AC, life before cancer and life after cancer. And life before cancer is not the life you end up with after cancer. No matter how well things are going, your life has changed. And you change internally as to who you are in some ways, not necessarily dramatically. In all my years, I only have one patient who actually left his family behind and moved to the Southwest to move on a Native American reservation to learn how to make jewelry, because he had stomach cancer and had a few months to live. But most people don't do that kind of changing. They're not that dramatic. It may be more subtle. It may be something that you don't see right away, but you see evolving over time. So those are the kinds of things, and in that little tiny print over there are some of the references that I've used in talking about that, and I'm happy to share more details. I have all the articles with me if you want. This is called The Road Home, and this is another one with a lot of words here, like choice, tears, fear, hope, spirit, and again, no matter how well things go, your body isn't the same body you had from before cancer, whether it's with scars or with side effects or whatever else is going on, that you will. Now, I'm 7 years out, and I can look at my naked body, and it looks like sort of like this, but I don't see it anymore. It doesn't even register anymore. But when you have body changes, it takes a while for all that to get assimilated and to sort of own it as your body. This is your body, for better or for worse, through sickness and through health. You know, it's what happens with you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common physical issues, and then we can talk about it. But there's been some research that shows that a lot of symptoms in women with metastatic breast cancer and breast cancer in general have a cluster of symptoms, and you can see why they'll cluster together. One is difficulty sleeping. How many here get a good night's sleep?
With or without drugs?
Yeah.
Without drugs. Without drugs. Anybody get a good night's sleep without drugs or some kind of help? Okay, so just think about that. If you don't get a good night's sleep, what happens the next day? You're tired. You might be crabby. You might not be thinking as clearly. Okay, so then you're fatigued, right? So sleeping poorly and fatigue. And then if you have pain of any kind, or if you've had any of the drugs that cause neuropathies, right? Now they found out that pain was less of an issue than the issues of numbness and tingling in your hands and feet that can be very annoying. And that takes energy to deal with that. Not only just how to do things differently, but it's like a nagging thing there. So it may not be a number 10 on the 0 to 10 scale, but it may be a constant 2 or 3, and that takes away energy from that. So when you think about that cluster, if you can make one of those different, you can alter the cluster a bit. And so it's like whack-a-mole. Let's whack a good night's sleep in there, and then maybe you'll start feeling better, which will give you the energy to go exercise, which helps with your mood and helps you sleep better. And so there's a lot of things that we can do around that. But these are obviously the common things about physical symptoms. Are there any others here? Somebody's flashing already. Doing things like even just managing your hot flash. I have a fan in every bag I carry. You know, you do things that you dress in layers all the time because you never know. And it gets really embarrassing when all of a sudden you start turning purple in meetings and they think you're mad or something. But, you know, it's like when I feel it coming on, I say, you know, in a few minutes I'm going to change colors, but don't worry about it and let's keep going, you know, because it's like one of those chameleons or what have you. But what other kinds of physical symptoms have you experienced that isn't on this list? Okay, we're going to get to that. The mental fuzziness is a real issue. It's not, we call it chemo brain, but it's not actually chemo brain because we found out that people may have it even before they get chemo. So that there may be just from the cancer, or it may be from the stress and fatigue and sleep difficulties, but we do know, come on in, we do know that cognitive fatigue, when you're fatigued, your cognitive fatigue makes all of that worse. So if you're not getting a good night's sleep or you're tired during the day, it's also going to affect how you're thinking. And then what do? We ask you to make big decisions when you're feeling like that, right? Do you want to keep your breast? Do you want to take it off? You know, so we ask you to make very big decisions when you are not necessarily in the best position to make those. And you can always say, I need to sleep on it. I need to get more information. I don't need to make that decision today. You know, I want to get more information. Can you write some of these things down for me or whatever? Knowing that you may have cognitive fatigue, first of all, somebody did some wonderful studies that cognitive fatigue can be addressed by things like exercise, but particularly exercise like walking or sitting in nature. So if you have a park near you and you can go sit in the park, or if you can look out a window, or any of those kind of things have actually helped reduce cognitive fatigue. So I come home sometimes and take a 20-minute power nap, and then I can do what else I have to do, but it just is, if I don't do that, it's going to be really a lot of, you know, spinning and lost energy and effort about things like that. So you can think about how you sort of manage some of those changes. And the other is then you compensate by taking notes, using a lot of stickies, or other kinds of things that you need to do. I worked with a woman who had ovarian cancer, and she had significant cognitive issues afterwards, and so she would write meticulous notes when she was in meetings so that she wouldn't forget, you know, or make sure that she understood things by writing them down. So you have different kinds of compensation with doing those kinds of things. It's not uncommon at all. Part of it's driven by fatigue. Part of it's not. So then I want to talk about sort of the emotional piece of that and the psychological piece that goes along with that. And cognitive issues can sort of bridge both of those areas. But we talked a lot before, and you heard Don and Lisa talk about distress, which is sort of the bucket term for anxiety, depression, angst, existential crisis, things like that. And what I try and say to people is, stand and look your fear in the face. And that's hard. But when you do, you can then back up and say, what's the worst thing you're worried about? And then deal with that. So I worked with a very young woman with a high risk of recurrence, and she was so anxious about all of that she wasn't getting her mammograms, and she wasn't coming in for her checkups. And so one of the things I said to her, she was a single mom with a little girl, and I said, what is it you're so worried about? And she said, well, what's going to happen to my daughter if something happens to me? And I said, well, let's stand and look at that. Do you have a written will? Or do you have an arrangement with family members about what's going to happen? She didn't have any of that. And I said, let's stand and look at what it is you're worried about. Would this make it better if you knew you had a plan? That even though that's not the worst, that's the worst thing you would know would happen. But if you knew that it was taken care of, would that relieve you a little bit so you could show up to get your mammograms? So if you stand there and look it in the face, like Anna Kate Owens was talking in the other room about just doing other things. Now, I wrote when I was having my second surgery, I wrote my daughter a letter because I know she would have been really pissed if I died on the table, because it was an elective procedure, but it was something that I took a year to decide after living with this for 5 years that I was going to go forth and redo this. So I wrote her a letter that if something happened would have been in the folder with all my stuff. I have a spreadsheet with all my credit cards, all my bank accounts, all my insurance stuff with the account number and an 800 number, so that if somebody needs to do anything for me, it's all on one page. So it's going to make somebody else's life easier. And I keep it in a folder, the same folder with her letter, that if someday, I even got down to who she should go shopping with for a wedding dress. But you can think these things through and write them down or do something about them. It's like unloading your backpack. It's just getting it off your back. It's maybe difficult to do, but by facing it and dealing with some of that stuff, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier. And if not, then, if that's something that's really a hard thing to do, you may want to ask for some help about that. I had a friend who had ovarian cancer, and she had 2 teenage children, and I was trying to get her to do some things for her daughter so that in the future she might have a letter from her or a picture from her or a videotape from her. And she got really angry about it, and because she just didn't want to die. This was just something she didn't want to do. And so it's not necessarily something you want to wait till things are, when you're not feeling well or whatever. You may want to do those things to take care of that stuff. And my daughter laughs because I actually keep a journal for her, because I figured I'll either have Alzheimer's or something else by the time she ever asks these questions, and I won't remember it anyway. But you may keep a journal, that speaks to your child in a voice for when they're an adult and may choose to read this. You may do what Anna Kate had a great idea. She said she read it in some magazine where anytime you think about a wish or a thought for somebody, you just put it on a little note and you put it in a shoebox. So there's lots of ways of doing things to address your fears. Like I was in the study with Lisa Park that we were doing, one of the parents was saying, I'm afraid because my children are so young that they're not going to remember me. And one of the things that you can have pictures, but one of the things that's really hard to remember is your voice. Get a videotape a message so they can hear your voice. So those are the kinds of things you can do when you're feeling well. I have all this stuff done. So if anything ever happened, my sisters always think I'm crazy about it, but I think, I'm better off doing that now and continuing to update that as we go along. Sorry. It's hard. There's no getting around it. So there's a lot of things to be afraid of, but most of those fears can be addressed standing there looking at them and or asking about them. I'm afraid about having pain. I'm afraid about how I'm going to die. I'm afraid about losing my functional ability. I'm afraid about not being able to get my kids off to school. I'm afraid about whatever. And those are the things you can talk to your providers about, because we can sort of give you scenarios about somebody who has a disease like yours and what we expect. And this is not breast cancer, but I dealt with a man that I took care of with colon cancer, and he kept asking his providers, how long did I have to live? And nobody wanted to answer him because they thought he was asking how many days or months or what have you. And so they came to me, and I met with him and his wife, and that wasn't what they were really asking about, although that's how they used the words because they didn't know how to ask it differently. But what they wanted to know was, they lived in a bad neighborhood and they had little kids, and they wanted to know if he was going to live long enough for them to move. And they had little kids, and he wanted to know if he would be able to stay at home. And so I went through all these scenarios based on where his cancer was, about what kinds of scenarios, like if you have the cancer spread to your liver and that's all you have, what may happen? It's spread to your lungs, what might happen? It's, all those scenarios. And I talked about 5 or 6 different ways, but basically from the tempo of his disease, talked to him about it being relatively slow going. He had 2 or 3 years in between each major episode that he probably had time. And when I went to his funeral, his wife came up to me and said, he died just like you said he would. And I'm like, oh my God, I even said about hitting a bus, or getting hit by a bus, like, did that really happen? But what she remembered was they got the information they needed to make the decisions they needed to do what they wanted to do. And so when sometimes we ask questions that on the surface seem like they're one thing, but we're really asking about something else. And so I'm going to give you some tools about how to sort of get at what you need versus what you may be asking for on the surface. So part of that's just really taking a deep breath, knowing this is hard, and it's okay to be upset about it because it's hard. And facing it and doing some of these things may make it a tad bit easier as you go along. And what it says under here is about the Relay for Life. But the other part about this now is about the psychosocial support piece. And there was a meta-analysis which took in many, many different studies that showed, not related to cancer, but social support, not having it, has the health effects of the equivalent of smoking a pack a day. So having social support is incredibly important in your life. So you already know that some of the friends you thought you had aren't really your friends. And then you have friends you didn't know you had by how people react. And then of course there's a, how are you? That people come up and they ask you, no, really, how are you? It's like, what do you want to know? What is it you're asking about? And so there's sort of the voyeurs in the whole process, and they're not really your friends, right? Your friends show up when you need help and just do it without asking, or work with you and stay accompanying you, or doing the things that you need with that. And so one of the things that I found with life after cancer than before cancer is I don't have time for those people around the edges. I mean, life's too short to spend time with people who don't get it. And a friend of mine who died of cancer, she was an oncology nurse, and she had like 3 different kinds over years. She had a great talk that she talks about the signposts of survivorship, and she used all the road signs like stop, yield, turn around, do all of those things, but picture that. But she said there were 3 kinds of people. There are other people who were on the same journey. There were the tourists, and there were the guides. And you don't want to have tourists in your life. It's just too draining. It's not. You can get rid of all the tourists in your life and not feel bad about that at all. And you obviously know how to work with people who are on the same journey. And then there's people like us who have either been there or have done this for work, or other people who are here to guide you along the journey. And I'm so glad that analogy has become more prevalent, because in the 70s it was the war on cancer, because we had Vietnam and Nixon in office, and that's what we did. And then with Armstrong, it was like, a competition with a sports thing. But it really is a journey. And it may be a shorter or a longer journey, or it may be a smooth journey, it may be a rocky journey, it's all kinds of things like that. But it really matters that you have social support. Now, the other thing I can tell you, because I've done enough focus groups, is you probably can't talk to your family members the way you can talk to each other, right? Because one is you want to spare them, and second of all, they don't get it. And so, when I did a focus group of women, about the effects of having breast reconstructive surgery, the stuff that they could tell each other, and it was hysterical. And so one of the stories was this like 85-year-old woman and was telling the story about how she went with her daughter for her checkup after her reconstructive surgery. And so the surgeon said to her, well, she could start having sex again. And her daughter piped up and said, oh, do you have somebody in mind? Because it was just like he never bothered to realize she was a widow and that this wasn't, that wasn't her issue at that point. But, the things that you can share with each other are things that other people may go, right? But that's great because that's a great outlet and because we get it in a very different way. And so you want to seek that out because that's a different kind of support than when your neighbor or your family member comes over because you've got to filter some of the things you're saying or doing differently. You're trying to protect them or you're trying to keep up, a brave front or whatever that is. So just remember, having social support is a very important part of this, wherever, however you can get it. We did this online study called CHESS for women with breast cancer, and we found out that we provided information, support, and then access to experts to answer questions and things. And we found out that the women use that site more for support with each other. When people used a similar program for AIDS, they used it more for information. And a lot of the biggest time for entries, because you could go on, it was like a message board and stuff, most of them were in the middle of the night when people couldn't sleep. And then all of a sudden you got pinged back because there's somebody else out there who also can't sleep. And so it was a very safe place. So there's a lot of online places and a lot of resources where you can find information like that. So never hesitate to reach out because there's always somebody else out there that can relate to you on those things. And then the last piece is about the spiritual piece. Now, you don't have to believe in God and you don't have to belong to a certain religion or any of that, but this is also the time when people go through sort of that existential crisis about what do I believe, is there life after this or any of the other kinds of things. And so what we know that a lot of people go through that kind of searching questions about what does this life mean to me? And how do I put it in context to what's happened or what may still happen? And that's also another great part where you may be looking and asking a lot of questions, but it also may be something that provides you a lot of support. And in our interviews with parents with metastatic cancer, we found the ones who had a strong faith, they had a strong faith that even though this was a terrible thing, that there was support and something would get through. Other people who didn't have that kind of faith got that kind of support in other ways through their social support or other things. So it doesn't mean you have to run out and believe in all these things, but you think about what gives you support. Is it understanding the meaning you've had in life with others? Is it the belief you have of what happens after, whatever that is? But that's also an important component of the quality of life. So you can see why, even if you're physically not feeling well, if those three other buckets are going well for you, it can accommodate that. So think about them always in balance with each other. When one's not in balance, how do you try to adjust the other so that you get the support to feel better about what's going on? And we all know, no matter what's happened, whether you've had treatment or what have you, that life after cancer is not life before cancer. It can't be. It's a life-threatening event in some way. And that's why we call ourselves survivors, that can be anybody who faces an actual or potential life-threatening activity. And that may be Katrina, it could be 9/11, it could be breast cancer. And the important part about this that I really liked about this piece of artwork is it's entitled, "You Are Greater Than the Sum of Your Parts." And that's hard to remember at times, especially when certain things are acting up or you have to manage certain parts of your life based on what's going on. But, we're talking about the whole you, not just your body parts. And one of the things that I see happening is we've medicalized people in a way that I hear people refer themselves as their cancer, or their body part that's been affected or whatever. And I can tell you from examining as many women as I have that we almost become dissociated with our breasts, that we could take off our clothes anywhere and show our breasts to almost anybody, right? When I ask if you want a gown, most of the women say, "Oh no," and because we almost dissociate from our bodies because we show our body parts to so many people under so many circumstances. that we almost don't believe there are our parts anymore, but they are. And so we need to stay connected with that, whether it's through massage, meditation, exercise, or other things that you want to still stay in your body and still stay part of what's your body as you go along. Now, I put this word cloud together because I figured out how to do them, so I thought they were fun. But what I did is I wrote down all the questions that we get asked all the time by people with cancer, whether they're newly diagnosed or not. And then I put it into a word cloud, because what happens is when you come in for a visit, we tell you things, and this is what's going on in your head, right? And then we say, any questions, right? And you stare back and you think, how in the world could I ask this based on what you just said, right? So one of the things I recommend before you go in for a visit is you write down a piece of paper, or if somebody's going with you, 3 things that the questions that you have before you go in, because they're going to go out your head the minute you walk in the door. And they'll only come back to you the minute you open that door again and you're out in the hall and you're like, so you want to write the questions down. It's really helpful also to have another person there with you. Now, I used to bring somebody with me, and we would do a role rehearsal beforehand where she would ask me, what is it you want to know? And we would write them down. If I forgot, then she would say, well, here's some of the other questions. And I had one couple, when we did this focus group with people with metastatic cancer, they said they weren't given things in writing. And that the only proof she had that she had a visit or that something was going on was the bill they gave her on the way out the door and when her next appointment was. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about giving you a written plan. And one of the things I'd like you to ask for, because this is some of the work that I'm doing, is we're doing this thing where we're giving people, when they end treatment, these survivorship care plans that talk about what's next and what have you. But when we did focus groups about people who had metastatic disease who weren't ending treatment in that way, they wanted something different. They wanted a written care plan, which means that when you're going in to see your doctor about how things are going, they wanted it written down what the plan of care was going to be, not for the rest of your life, but for this episode. So if you're going to put me on this drug for 12 weeks and then we're going to repeat the CAT scans, I want you to write that down so I can remember, because I'm not understanding. And I'm getting about 10, there's studies that show that if you absorb 25% of what you're told is high. That's not throwing, that was in pre-op teaching of people who didn't have cancer. So you can imagine it's probably like 10%, maybe 5% of what you're being told you're getting. And maybe the other person next to you is getting another 10%. So you might walk out with maybe 20% if you're lucky. So have it written down to say, we're going to give you this drug every week for the next 12 weeks, and then we're going to repeat the scans. And people said that's all they want to know. They don't want to know what if the scans are good and what if the scans are bad, or what the options are beyond that. I don't want to get too far down the road. But I want to understand what this course of my care is about. So if you have trouble remembering, or if that's not mapped out for you, when you go in for your visits, it's very reasonable to ask to have that written out for you, for your visits. Do any of you get that now? Any of you, when you go in for a visit, get anything written and handed to you about this is what's going to happen, or this is what you're on? Yeah, okay. It's just, if you do that one thing, you will be training your healthcare providers to deliver better care, okay? So just ask, at the end of this visit, would you remind me what we're going to do next? We're going to get a blood count, we're going to do another scan, and you're going to come back on Tuesday and we're going to talk about your next treatment. Or here's the next treatment and this is what we're going to do. How in the world can you remember all that, right? I mean, even if it was a relatively benign procedure, it's hard to remember all that stuff. So just remember this word cloud. And remember that you shouldn't be expected to understand and remember all of this, and that you're going to have questions that you forgot to ask. Because even though I see women who come back for their annual checkup and their annual mammogram, doesn't mean that they don't have questions about other things, right? You come back in and it's like, oh, I meant to ask you this one thing. Write them down before you come in. Have 2 or 3 questions so that you don't forget them before you leave, because that's the kind of thing when you go out the door, you're sort of kicking yourself about. Now I want to end and then just open up for questions. This was a student nurse at UNC, Catherine Wilson. And she developed a cough and ended up with lung cancer at 22. And this was the first year they had that contest with Lilly Oncology. And she and her father shaved his head to go out with her. And her saying was something that Mae West always used to say, which is, Mae West used to say, you only go around once, but if you do it right, once is enough. But this is her quote. My greatest challenge has been and still is to learn how to keep living with this illness as part of my life instead of preparing to die from it. To still work on my nursing degree, still do fun things, and not forget how to live. I've learned and I'm still learning how to live today without looking too far ahead, to make the best of whatever is going on, to find something good even in the worst of my days. I've seen that I am loved by a lot of people, and that's something most people go through life not knowing. And she entitled it, This Is Not a Rehearsal. So I want to end on that and then just open it up for questions or comments about things that you've seen or you've wondered about, or you'd like to hear from other people about how they're managing with these things. You don't even, they're a small enough group, you don't even have to write them down, just shout them out, we'll be fine. What's been helpful for you guys to handle what you're dealing with? If you had one thing you could say, what was one thing that you found was helpful advice or helpful that you found doing?
I would say one of the things that's helped me the most is online groups that I found. When I was diagnosed, the doctors were very careful to say, don't believe everything you read online. Here are the websites you're allowed to go to. And if they said you don't want to get false information, and this is what where you should go. But I was the 5th patient at the practice I'm at to start on Perjeta. So for me, it was side effects, and I was coming in and saying, I think this is, it's never happened before, and you're saying it's non-receptive, it's not Taxotere, it's not so meta, and they said, we don't think it's the Perjeta. Well, I found somebody who was just finishing her 6 treatments of Perjeta, who was down in Orlando, Florida, and talking, being able to talk to her, and her having the same, these aren't Perjeta side effects that I had. Her doctors had said, well, you don't think that's Perjeta to her.
Until we have enough people who've had it, and then it's like,
and now a woman in Colorado started talking to me as I was finishing my first 6 rounds of treatment. So it was really interesting. I think that online community of support, because there aren't a lot of young people in my area and stage 4 people at where I'm at, it's been very helpful to meet both those groups online.
So some of the fears about going online like that are sort of old-fashioned in the sense that there have been enough studies now of looking at online support groups and find they're self-correcting. That somebody may say something that's not correct, but given time, the group corrects it, even ones that are not monitored by health professionals. So there's enough research to say, sooner or later, somebody's going to jump in and say, you should talk to your doctor about that. I'm not sure that's true. Or here's a reference of something else I found. So finding a good support group that you can find online, there's a number of ways to do that. Certainly acor.org has lots of different groups that you may find one or this organization or many others that have that. And then I brought some samples, and I know that there's things out on the table. I hope I'm not messing up your film too much, but there are lots of organizations, and I have a handout for you that I'll pass around that have a number of them identified, that you can go online, and if you'll just pass these around, and it has that model. There's also, there's a lot of books that are out there. If you want, this is just 2 that I found on Amazon, or any number of ones, but you want to get your basic file, pass them around so you can take a look at them. And then there's the Young Coalition Survivors.
Young Survivors Coalition.
Yes, thank you. Little dyslexia. Which is this group, if you haven't seen them. So there's a lot of different ones along those lines, so that you will find it, or you can compare notes with people to find one that you find is good for what you're looking for.
One of the things that I've kind of come around to in terms of trying to find support, because yes, the online support groups are great, but there's something else that you gather from having face-to-face or sitting around in a group and being able to sort of have more of an organic conversation that cancer flows in and out of, right? And I've come to, and I live in Toronto, which is a very big city in Canada, and it's very hard to find young adults with metastatic breast cancer, right? So what I've determined is that I need to find that I have a lot more in common, and every time I go to a breast cancer thing or just a young adult cancer thing, I find that it's isolating, and I find that I walk out of it feeling very alone, because there's not a lot of continuity or things that are the same between the breast cancer community as a whole. So what I've come around to is creating support groups that are dealing with young adult metastatic cancer, because I find that I have a lot more in common with somebody with ovarian or colon or lung cancer that's metastatic than I do with breast.
Right. And as you know, breast cancer gets a lot of attention, but not for women with stage 4, and you know that from your t-shirts and everything else. It's a group that feels pretty disenfranchised from the other mainstream things that are going on. So again, finding a younger group or finding a metastatic group like that. I know, like, if you're from this area, Cornucopia House does have a metastatic cancer support group. But again, a lot of times what will happen is you'll go in and there'll be a lot older people there. So it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. It's different issues.
And a huge big issue I find with YA organizations is that they just don't know how to deal with us. And so I've been going to as many things as possible and standing up and saying, like, look, what you're talking about is not dealing with our issues. You're talking and focusing on survivorship and moving beyond, and we need to talk about.
It's a very under-attended group of needs. And even I do a lot of survivorship stuff, and by definition it includes everybody, but a lot of the standards that are coming out are, we haven't gotten it right for any survivors yet, and so they're saying, well, let's start with this group and then we'll deal with some of the other things, but it needs to be a parallel process, that more attention is paid to the needs of people living with metastatic disease, because you could be living like that for years and need more support services. And as I said, there's a lot of reasons why that matters.
And collaborative. It needs to be collaborative.
Other people have other examples or other experiences with that, or found other things that have worked?
So one thing that you touched on is facing like the fears, and so when it spread to my brain, I was really scared and I had to just sit down and think, what am I so scared of? And I was scared of when I die, who is going to take care of these tasks for my children? And so what I did was I wrote down, the things that I was scared that my husband couldn't handle by himself. And so I thought of someone in my life that would be a good person to help my husband in these different aspects. And so then I signed like different friends. You can help my husband, making sure that the girls are signed up for Girl Scouts, and another friend to make sure that he has help making sure he plans a vacation, and, all those things that I'm worried about that I always did and he doesn't do. So.
Men, I mean, to not too stereotype, but men are pretty helpless with that stuff. I mean, that's sorry. I mean, it's just how it is. And that at UNC we've been doing work with fathers with young children whose wives or the mothers of their children have died for that very reason, is that it's very hard to know how, we're experts at multitasking. No matter what cognitive shape our brains are in, we still multitask up a storm. And that's a learned thing. So it's not like somebody's going to know how to do it the day after. And I don't know if you've heard of the book, or I think they were even making a movie about the Dad's Club, about a dad who had an illness that was life-threatening. And so he negotiated with his friends to do different things to be the dad for his kids for those specific things. And I think he spread it out on 2 or 3 friends, but it's a great idea to ask your friends. I actually asked my friend before my surgery about taking my daughter shopping for her wedding dress. Not that there's any guy, not that any of the guys she's seeing now is that kind of material. But she said, I'll even go if you live. If you make it through your surgery, I'll still go with you. And it's like, great, But, I could go under anesthesia knowing that at least that kind of thing that were big milestones were taken care of. So I think there's a lot of strategies you can use like that. So it's a great idea. How did your friends respond when you were asking of that?
Oh, they were so grateful to have something, specific they could help me with, because everyone says, how can I help? How can I help? And I'm like, I don't know. But now they know what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. And people don't, when they ask that, have a list of things in mind about how they can help. Seriously. People want to be helpful and they have no clue. And that's the one thing I learned after my diagnosis is what was helpful and what wasn't helpful. And there's a lot of people who are unhelpful in trying to be helpful. And the people who were helpful were the ones that were really remarkable, who must have learned it from other experiences. They were the ones that rang the doorbell, handed in a tray of lasagna, and left. They didn't even have to talk to anybody. They didn't expect to be entertained. They didn't come in. They didn't do anything else. They're the ones who said, I will pick up and drive your daughter to her soccer games, or I am coming in to do your laundry. And more shocking was my sister, who came and stayed and took care of me, and she is so medically averse and did all my drains. And I was like, absolutely shocking, because she is so averse to that kind of stuff. But and I was like, no, that's okay. And she's like, I'm coming. It doesn't matter. I'm coming and I'm doing this. I was shocked. Of course, now I owe her big, but there's other things like that.
So I have teenagers, and I was diagnosed when my kids were 7 and 11. And my big concern was just the upkeep of the household duties and stuff like that. And I said to my husband, I said, I want you to make sure that, the cleaning lady will still be coming and you're going to pay her. And he goes, I don't have to pay her. And I'm like, really? Yes, you do. And he goes, no, I'm going to marry her. So then I told this story to my mother, and she goes, oh, that's not going to work, Kathy. And I said, why?
Don't tell your
She goes,
house cleaner.
because then the cleaning lady's going to, say, I want to get a cleaning lady.
That's great. And that's what I mean about, you can talk about those things and you can have humor about things other people would be aghast at, that can work. And go ahead.
I have a question for the group. I'm wondering if anyone's single and dating and how that works. How do you meet people? What do you tell them, and when do you tell them?
That's a really hard topic, and I'm still grappling with that. I don't know about other people in the room.
I was going to say, I'm single and not dating.
Yeah,
really,
So
really answer the question.
So I've been doing practice dates, like dating people I really don't care about, to sort of practice telling them. And so now I'm introducing it earlier, and I'm not quite choking up about it. But it's still even thinking about how you do that. It's not easy. I think it's easier if you say it matter-of-factly early on. And I actually was on Match.com with somebody who we were getting ready to meet because it seemed to be clicking. And he said, this is going to sound funny, but if you've had breast cancer, I can't meet you. And I was quite surprised. I said, well, I guess that's that then, because he sounded like somebody I was going to really like. And he said, my wife just died 2 years ago of breast cancer, and I just don't think I can go there. And I said, well, I understand, and I'm sorry to hear that. But when I responded, well, I guess then we're not meeting, he was like, oh, like it was really hard. So you don't know when you talk to people also where they're coming from and what their own experience has been like that. So, it's a risk. It's a risk, but it's earlier to do it early on when there's not a lot invested. And then the other thing is thinking about doing things like getting really sexy lingerie, to make it easier the first time around, and to do some other things. But it's awkward and it's hard, and I think just practicing makes it easier.
And I have a couple of really good guy friends, and I've spent a lot of time hanging out with them. They've actually, a couple of my really good guy friends have been better to hang out with than my girlfriends. They've been, guys are just kind of easy like that, but one of the things that I've done is I've kind of noticed what questions they ask and what things kind of, and that's kind of helped me. Even, I've worked in restaurants for years. One of my regular customers at the last restaurant I worked at was a lawyer. He always, my staff used to joke, they'd be like, oh, he's your boyfriend, because he'd always come in to see me. But he and I have gone out several times since I was diagnosed just to go out and catch up. Like he's like, I miss seeing you, whatever. And, I've just kind of paid attention to what do men focus on? Like what is they have different questions than women do, and kind of what is that? So that's made it a little easier too, because there are things that are important to women that men don't even, like it doesn't even penetrate their consciousness, and it's been interesting and helpful to hang out with them and see, like, I spent 4 days with, one of my guy friends I've known since I was 15, and he said to me at the end of the weekend, he was like, I was so glad to see you going like without a hat on, just blowing bald, hanging out with us, and he's like, and that made me happy. So it's just, they're different, so that's helped me a lot, hanging out with them and just seeing what their deal is.
One of the people at UNC has done research with couples, and the women are worried about having sex and the men are worried about hurting their wives. So they came at it from a different perspective, but the bottom line was the men just wanted to have sex. But they just wanted to have sex. They didn't care about all that stuff. And women were all worried about how I looked and all of those other things. And they were like, I want to know you're okay and I want to have sex with you, to be intimate with you. Those things don't matter. And so it's one of those things where you can really sort of miss the target depending on how you talk about it. And if somebody you're talking to can't talk about it, that's a clue. You might not want to have a second date or a third, depending on how it goes. So, you never know.
Since we're on that topic, what about libido issues?
Having none?
Yeah.
Well, for the thing that the men's libido, it's sort of point A to point B. They're interested in having sex, they'll have sex. Women, it's a different diagram. It's a circular diagram that includes emptying the dishwasher or vacuuming and doing other things like that. So to get a woman's libido going, it takes different things than to say, I want to have sex tonight. The other part, so even if you have a little bit of a libido, it may take a different route to get it going. The other thing is, given a low libido, women often will get their libido started after the act starts, because then they start getting into it, as opposed to waiting to sort of be turned on to start having activity. Is you can start having activity and that will turn you on. And so sometimes you have to do it ass backwards to get some of that going. And I just saw a woman this week who said, I have absolutely no interest at all, and it's sort of like pity sex. And I don't think many men are interested in having pity sex. So, there's other ways to be affectionate. There's other ways to be close. There's other ways of dealing with all that. And actually, that's one of the other booklets that I brought. And this is probably one of the better ones. And you can get it online. It's at the American Cancer Society. It's the one of the better things that they've done is this booklet for women and one for men. And it talks about all of that. It talks about positions so that it doesn't hurt, about lubrication. It talks about all kinds of things and other ways to be intimate. And so I can pass that around too. There's very few things that are this specific that are available, unfortunately. There's like one or two other books around that talk about those things. But there's lots of ways to be intimate with a person that don't include intercourse. And there's lots of ways to have intercourse, whether you're intimate or not. So it's I think having a conversation. I'll tell you two stories. I had a patient who I was really, really sad about, because she had metastatic breast cancer, and she and her husband were married like 50-something years. And at one visit, for some reason, I said something that made her ask the question about whether her cancer was contagious. And they hadn't had sex for 2 years because she was afraid she was going to give him cancer. And I thought, bad on me that they had 2 years without something that was important to them, because I guess, I was 20 at the time, or 22. What do I think? Old people have sex. Of course, that's 15 years beyond whatever I am at the time. But you have to remember, people are sexual human beings no matter how old they are and what's going on. And then the other patient that I had that, again, I leave it open for questions at the end, and then I just ask questions about, are you having vaginal dryness? Are you having pain on intercourse? Many women have problems like that, so I usually normalize a statement, which is many women find they have no libido or vaginal dryness interferes with having intercourse. Are you having any problems with that? So if you're not being asked those questions, you can certainly frame it to make your provider feel more comfortable. Saying, I'm sure many women have these problems, but I'm having this. What do you recommend? But anyway, so this 84-year-old woman sends her husband back out to the lobby because she had one more question at the end of the visit. And she said, we haven't had sex since I've been diagnosed, and that's fine with me. But I worry about him. And I said, so have the two of you ever talked about it? And she said, no, I don't know what to say, and I don't know how to talk to him about it. We just don't talk about it. So I don't know if he's okay or whether he needs to do something else. And so we just talked about how some of those conversations are very hard when you're face-to-face with a person. And they go for after-dinner walks, and so they're side by side. I said, that's a very good time to sort of raise the question, to say, how are you doing? You know, do you miss this? I miss this. You know, are there things we should be thinking about? So to make it a little safer to, you know, it's like if you have kids, when do you talk to them? When they're in the backseat of the car, right? That's when the most meaningful things happen, when you hear what's really going on at school or any other things. Sometimes it's easier and safer not to be face-to-face with the person. And so talk to them, talk to her, and I thought, here, I've been seeing her for a couple of years, and that was the first time she brought that up. So you never know. So, you know, think about it and think about how you might want to deal with that. And I'm happy, I know our time's up, but I'm happy to hang around for any other questions that you may have. And thank you, and I hope the rest of the conference is as good as what I've seen so far.
Thank you so much.